A lot to tell you about, a lot to get you caught up on. First of all, a huge happy birthday to a guy that was our guest on yesterday's show, Michael Anthony. Of course, the original bass player of Van Halen. And who knows, maybe the future bass player of Van Halen once again, fingers crossed. But Michael was on the show yesterday. I had no idea today would be his birthday, or was his birthday, and it is. So happy birthday to one of my favorite people in the world, Michael Anthony, celebrating today. If you missed the interview yesterday, you got to go get it on the app. A lot of people talking about it because Michael Anthony, who always gives me great stuff and always is just so honest and transparent about stuff, revealed that right now there's a little break in the schedule because he was indeed contacted by Van Halen about potentially touring at this time. And management had contacted him, and they talked about going out on the road, and that was called off, unfortunately. But, man, that was a big piece of news right there.
You know who went crazy over it on Twitter?
Who?
Our good pal Greg Renoff.
Well, yeah, I mean, Greg, having written Van Halen Rising, the author of that, he is – I just saw him in Tulsa, by the way, when I was there last week because Greg lives in Tulsa. And he, you know, he's always – he's like everybody. First and foremost, he's a Van Halen fan. And because he wrote that book, people could go to him just like they go to me and anybody else, just dying for any real information on Van Halen. So, you know, he has a following on social media, having written that book, even though it wasn't really an authorized VH book. But people come to him, and it's a great book, and people come to him looking for anything. And anytime anybody gets anything, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, Van Halen is such a stealth operation and so tight-lipped on everything. And like I said to Michael Anthony yesterday, every day I'm asked about Van Halen. Every day there's a different Van Halen rumor. That when anybody in any real position, like Michael Anthony, who of course is an original member of the band, says anything, or you read between the gibberish in some of these Roth interviews, people just try to pull out and dissect anything, and then when you get that little nugget of information, then it creates this big domino effect where everybody wants to say, okay, well, if this was going to happen, or if this would have happened, or it's crazy. It is so crazy how intense the Van Halen universe is, and how how completely void of any information there is. So that was a really, really interesting revelation, which Michael Anthony just volunteered for us yesterday on this show. And nobody knows now where it goes from here because obviously these rehearsals aren't happening. Obviously there's no touring happening. Do we see anything next year? It's anyone's guess. It really is. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a manager in the music industry, and he said to me, coming off of that interview yesterday, he goes, I just don't think you're ever going to see Van Halen again. If that was the case, that would be truly, truly sad. But nobody knows. It's just nuts. So, and apparently, like I said, the other really crazy thing about this, the Van Halen world, is that apparently, like last week, Valerie Bertinelli has a TV show, and Wolfgang Van Halen was on it. And my mom told me this because she would watch a show like that. I have no idea about a show like that. And she told me that he was on it kind of promoting his solo record, but it's a record, to my knowledge, that hasn't been released. And I don't know of any firm release date. So where is, you promote something when it's available or about to be available? I don't know what's going on there either. There's no band that has been cloaked in more mystery than Van Halen, one of the most loved bands in rock history. And certainly one of the greatest. So anyway, thank you to Michael for coming on, and you will get a little bit of, you'll get that interview again on the Weekend Best Of, which is 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, Saturday and Sunday, and you don't have to wait that long. Just go grab it on the app right now. a bunch of other things to hit you with at the top of the show here. Speaking of Van Halen, we have been talking the last couple days about this series on this channel Reels called Breaking the Band, which is really very much like Behind the Music. It's a complete knockoff of Behind the Music. The difference being that almost every episode of Behind the Music on VH1 was done with the involvement and blessings of the band being featured. This one, I believe every single episode has not been done with the current band's involvement in the show. The Van Halen one, which has run quite a bit and is now rerunning quite a bit, I know because I'm getting a lot of people saying to me, I saw you on Reels, man, because I'm in the Van Halen one. So that's been replaying, and I guess they're rolling out this whole run of new ones. And we have had stories in the last couple days in the news about Motley Crue being unbelievably unhappy that this company went and made this sort of documentary, if you will, about them and about the whole, if you don't know the story of these shows, it's called Breaking the Band because it's about when these bands implode. The whole thing is the arc of them starting to when they broke up. So it focuses a lot on the drama of the breakup and what allegedly happened that derails these original lineups of these great bands. To the point that they have in every episode a psychologist who gives her take on, I don't even know if she's a rock fan, but she gives her take on, like, from a psychology point of view, what's going on with the dynamic between this member and that member, which is kind of ridiculous, but whatever. So this show has gotten traction because so many of the artists that have had one done on them are unhappy about them. And none of them sign off on it, and none of them get involved in doing it. So what they are left to have on these shows are ex-members, former managers, journalists, people who have no direct contact or connection to the bands they're talking about, or people that used to but no longer work for them. So, or former members, like I said, like in the Van Halen one, Sammy and Michael were in it. Of course, they're not in Van Halen now. So Motley Crue has been vocal. One of the latest ones was on Motley Crue, and they've been vocal about being unhappy about it. And, I believe what these companies do, or what they should do, is the production companies will go to the artist, tell them what they want to do, ask for them to get involved, and as soon as an artist or their representation sort of sniffs out that it's going to be sort of, I don't know, focus on a certain period, or they're not going to have control of how it comes off, or it's going to make them look bad, or a lot of these guys, are like, oh, that was 30 years ago, I don't want to market anymore or let people know anymore how, out of my friggin' mind I was at that time. There's all these different reasons why they just don't want to be involved in it. They want too much control. They want to be paid, whatever. So most of them say, I'm out. We won't cooperate. We won't clear our music. We won't do this. We won't do that. We won't sit for an interview. But that will not stop these companies that want to still do these, and they will find, like I was saying the other day, these end-arounds to still make these shows. The end-arounds being get video clips that are public domain or that they can license from somewhere, hire a band to make music that sounds like the band that they're talking about but really isn't, use only 30-second clips or less of music from the actual band so they don't have to deal with publishing issues. They know how to work around this stuff if they really want to do it, and that's exactly what this show is doing. Now, all of that being said, Motley is very upset about their episode to the point that they are threatening to sue the company for producing it without their approval. And as I said before, something tells me this company's been doing this for a while on major acts. Something tells me they know the legalities in and out of what they can and can't get away with without having approvals. And they've been doing it for a while. And then last night, they premiered another new one. So I watched the Motley one last night, And then they premiered another new one on Guns N' Roses, which Guns N' Roses in that camp absolutely didn't want something like this being done on them. That's as tight, tightly knit, tight run, ironclad organization. They don't talk to anybody. Well, Axl doesn't now. I mean, Slash and Duff have been out there all over the place because they're doing their own things again. But Axl doesn't. That's the last guy in the world that's going to want something like this done on him. But they did it. And that premiered last night. So I watched the Motley one and the Guns N' Roses one back to back. Because, we're picking up on blowback from these artists. And as I was saying to Ed the other day, in a weird way, artists, being upset and sounding off about this show is actually giving it a lot of extra attention and exposure and promotion. Because it's making people want to watch it because, what is in it so bad? And it hooked me in because I watched 2 of them last night. And again, I was aware of it because I'm in the Van Halen one, but I was unaware that they were doing new shows now. I probably would have not even known it because that's not a channel I normally watch if it wasn't for the artists, the current artists being vocal about it. So the Motley one, in the case of all of them, to be honest, because I know Van Halen didn't like theirs, meaning Eddie and Alex, because Eddie Van Halen's wife, who is a publicist, was on social media killing it when that first premiered. But I watched all of them. Well, I didn't. I watched the one, the Van Halen one, the Motley one, the Guns N' Roses one. Honestly, outside of the reenactments, which are totally cheesy and unnecessary, and I don't know why shows put reenactments in. The actors don't look anything like the people. It's just not needed at all. But that just puts such a cheesy coat of paint on these things, in my opinion. It just reeks of like a soap opera vibe when they do that. And maybe the psychologist, too, I don't know, do we really need that? We really need a cutaway to a psychologist telling you, well, the dynamic between Slash and Axl, because of their upbringing, come on. But outside of those 2 things, I don't really see anything that bad about any of them and that grossly inaccurate. Because remember, if you're looking for accuracy, we are now in biopic mania, folks. And we've had 3 major rock biopics in the last year or so, Elton, Queen, and Motley, that are loaded with inaccuracies. And those are sanctioned by the people that are putting them out. The difference being, people are making money from them. They sanctioned it. They signed off on it. I get it. But there's inaccuracies all over the place in these, biopics. Now, granted, they're not documentaries. I know that. But this show, I mean, it's not, I understand that it focuses on a period that most of these artists want to forget about or rewrite. That period being when they were really on drugs or had 55 girlfriends or were fighting or, everybody wants to think of themselves in the here and now, evolved, older, wiser, maybe suppress a little bit of what they did 25, 30 years ago that was a part of their history. I get that. But that, let's be honest, that's a part of the history that people want to see and talk about. And in some cases, with a band like Guns or Motley, absolutely fueled a lot of their story. So last night, I watched these shows, and I'm like, what? Let me see what's in this. And by the way, beyond the fact that I was interviewed in the one episode for Van Halen, I have nothing to do whatsoever with the show, the channel, the producers, nothing. So I'm not coming at this at any point of any place of bias at all. But I sat back and said, what's so bad in these things and so inaccurate? And the truth is really nothing that I saw. Now, I know Vince Neil was upset because he said in the Motley Crue one, the manager claimed that Vince left because he wanted to race cars or something. But I didn't even get, unless I nodded out, I didn't even get the tone of that in the Motley Crue one, that was really the case. And, obviously been doing this forever, pretty well versed in these band stories, and I didn't think the whole thing was all that grossly unfair. It's very much like Behind the Music. Exactly like Behind the Music. And in the Motley one, they talked to Doug Thaler and Doc McGee. Now, those people are not currently involved in Motley Crue's career, but they were. I mean, those guys were the guys. They managed the band in the heyday. They would know the stories. They have no reason to make something up, right? Why would they? So even though they're not talking to people in these shows directly involved in the band's careers now, they are talking to legitimate people. It's not like they're just yanking people off the street. By the way, they are doing some of that. They are pulling journalists and stuff from wherever they pull them from. Who knows? I mean, a lot of times these companies will feed these journalists lines, or they'll tell the person talking because they need the soundbite, hey, say something about this. Here's what we need you to say. When I do those interviews for those shows, I'll never do that. If they ask me to comment on something that I know nothing about, I'll just say, I don't feel comfortable talking about this because I wasn't there. But there are plenty of people who just want to be on TV that will spit out lines that a producer feeds them to make it sound like they were experts in this stuff, or that they were there at that time when this stuff was going on, when they weren't. But you can throw a stone and find anybody who will do that, because most people just want some screen time on TV and say they're on TV. So there is some of that. But there is also very reputable people in it who were absolutely instrumentally involved in these artists' careers in their heyday. So for Motley, you had Doug Thaler and Doc McGee. Now, if you saw the Motley biopic, Doc McGee is in it as the manager. But if you watch it, in the beginning, they say, well, we actually had this other guy named Doug Thaler who was actually really involved, but we don't have the time to cover two managers, so bye, Doug, and they make him disappear in the movie, which I thought was pretty funny. But by every measure, Thaler was the guy that was actually the day-to-day guy with Motley Crue. So him and Doc being in this lended a ton of credibility to the story, in my opinion, because they lived it. They managed the band during the glory years. And, and I'll tell you, the other thing I'll tell you about the Motley Crue one, I was bored by it. I didn't think there's anything horrible or bad about it, but I was bored by it because the reenactment stuff is ridiculous. The actors playing the guys are ridiculous. It's completely unnecessary. And the other thing is, we've heard the Motley Crue story so many times now. For so long now. Of the drugs and the groupies and the this and the that and the heroin. I mean, we've heard it for since The Dirt came out. It hasn't stopped. We get it. So I kind of zoned out on the Motley Crue one, because especially just coming off the biopic where we got it all over again. The Motley Crue story has been more than well documented between books and biopics and Behind the Musics and documentaries, that there's only so many times you can keep hearing about the same thing. Tommy Lee, Heather Locklear, the car crash, the heroin, the this, revived with the needle in the heart. Anybody that's remotely a Motley Crue fan has heard these stories a billion times. So that was my only criticism with the Motley one, is like, give me something new. The Guns N' Roses one was interesting because they spoke to Alan Niven, who was the manager of the band from around Appetite just up to the release of Use Your Illusions. Now, there's a lot less done. The other guy they talked to in the Guns N' Roses one that was certainly there and took care of that band early in their career is a guy named Mark Cantor. If you've ever been to L.A., Cantor's Deli is a landmark. And Mark and his family, took Guns N' Roses under their arm early on, and they would hang out in that deli. And Mark has a book of tremendous photos of the earliest years of Guns N' Roses. So he's a guy that he actually was there. I mean, he knows what went on. He's interviewed appropriately. Alan Niven, appropriately, he was there. He managed the band in the whole rise of them. The Guns N' Roses one I found a lot more interesting because there's so much less has ever been done on Guns N' Roses in that way because they won't allow it. So through the end around, the other guy they talked to in the Guns N' Roses one is Gilby Clarke, who, of course, was in the band, replaced Izzy, has no real involvement in the band anymore, so Gilby felt comfortable talking. But nobody else from Guns N' Roses. I'm surprised they didn't get Adler to do it. Maybe Steven didn't want to, but he would. I was totally expecting to see his happy, smiling face pop up. But I actually found the Guns N' Roses one pretty interesting and pretty enlightening, depending upon its accuracy. Right down to Ed mentioned the other day about we were doing the cell phone bit with the cameras about the Axl with the phone incident and the whole riot in St. Louis, the tour with Aerosmith, the tour with Metallica. They covered the first show at the Ritz in New York for MTV, which I was at. They get into the fact how how Axl got Slash and Duff to sign that contract, signing over the name to him, which resulted in him being able to take over the band. So, again, these are all things that these bands, as they're constituted now, I understand they're old wounds and you don't want it publicized. You don't want that Band-Aid ripped off. And people talking about all that stuff again when you're kind of like in this whatever mode you're in 2019. But it is, to my, and I'm a pretty educated guy in this one area of stuff, which is rock music. To me, none of it is that wildly off base. I felt the same way about the Van Halen one. I understand none of them want these done because they're not involved, but I mean, if they were asked to be involved and they passed on it, well, that is what it is then, right? So I'm not really sure how that all worked, if they were offered and declined, or this company's just like, I don't want to deal with these guys, we're just going to make these things without them. Like I said, when they interviewed me for the Van Halen one, I was totally unaware that it was going to be a reenactment thing, and all I knew was Sammy and Michael were in it. That was good enough for me. But again, with Van Halen, two guys not currently in the band, so they went and found those guys to do the interviews. So my point in all this is that I think a lot of the people being upset about these being done, I get that they're kind of cheesy because the reenactments and some elements of it are, I agree. But in terms of how accurate they are and factual they are, from what I know, for the most part, obviously there's some things that are, maybe there is a difference with something with the Motley one. I don't know, but it doesn't, even Dee Snider, who narrates these things, does the voiceover. You don't see him, you just hear him. I saw him on social media. He said, I don't see, and Dee's a guy that is well-versed in rock. He said, I don't know what's so egregious in these things. He said that on social media. What's the outrage over? He said, I tend to kind of agree with him. The outrage is over the fact that the bands are not involved in them. They can't control them. They don't make money off of them. They don't have final cut of them. They have nothing to do with them. And I understand that outrage if you were not even offered to be involved. But if you offered and passed, well, and I don't think there's been one yet, and there's a couple others on my DVR. There's one on the Eagles, which I'm sure they did an end around on that one. But I'm going to be curious to see if there's ever any of them, for however long they keep doing them, that actually has a current member of the band in it. Are people just giving a blanket pass on these, or is the company not even offering for them to be in it? If they're not even offering, then I understand also the artist being upset about it. Because you probably wouldn't like it either if you were in a band and one day all of a sudden a TV show pops up on you that you had no knowledge of coming out. But that's the entertainment business, right? So I found it all very interesting. I thought I would watch that real quick. Also last night, because I know I'm late for a break. In terms of my viewing last night between those two shows, I watched the Hollywood Vampires perform on Jimmy Kimmel. I DVR'd it and I watched it. Really interesting because they have a new record coming out, and Alice Cooper told me, and so did Tommy Hendrickson, who are both in the band, that the difference with this record is going to be, unlike the first record, which was predominantly covers, this record was going to be original material. Well, I don't know why, but to debut a track from that record on national TV last night, they played a David Bowie cover. They played Heroes, which I don't even know if they recorded for the record. So I thought that was interesting and strange, because all I was hearing about with Hollywood Vampires record number 2 is this one's going to be all original new music and a big national TV spotlight to kick it off, and they play a Bowie tune. That being said, it sounded really cool. And the other really surprising thing about it was fronting the band and singing lead vocals was Johnny Depp. For those that don't know the Hollywood Vampires, it's an all-star band built around Alice Cooper, Joe Perry, and Johnny Depp. For the most part, Johnny Depp has been a little bit as much in the background as a guy like Johnny Depp can be in the background, meaning not out front, not doing a lot of interviews, not really, kind of just hanging in the back a little bit. Well, last night, Johnny Depp was fronting Hollywood Vampires. He sang lead vocals on Heroes and had a guitar around his neck. There were 4 guitar players in the Hollywood Vampires last night. You had Depp, you had Tommy Hendrickson, you had Joe Perry, and you had Alice Cooper. And the most incredible thing to me about the whole performance, which sounded great, was that I've never seen this in my life. Alice Cooper just playing guitar. It looked downright strange. I've never in my life seen Alice Cooper with a guitar around his neck. And let alone not even singing and playing guitar, like just over on the side in full Alice regalia. And there they are, there's Alice Cooper just like not, kind of strumming the guitar while Johnny Depp fronted the band. It's fascinating. And Joe Perry, played the bulk of the lead guitar riff in the song. But when in that configuration, Hollywood Vampires has 4 guitar players on stage. And then they've got Chris Wise playing bass, who used to be in the Cult and Ace Frehley's band. And he was playing like a stand-up bass. And Glenn Sobel plays drums. Now, Glenn Sobel and Tommy Hendrickson are both in Alice Cooper's solo band. It sounded great. Ed is telling me that they released Heroes as a single from this record, which to me is completely counter to everything they said this record was supposed to be about, exactly. Which was them becoming an original band of all original material, because the first record was all covers.
And Alice stressing that Depp wrote most of the new songs on this record.
Great, but where are they? Like, I think all we've heard now is like, I think there's 1 or 2 songs on the first record, and I mean, I don't know what's on this second record, but all I kept hearing is it's not going to be covers. We're getting into it's a whole concept. It's an original record, and then they lead with a cover. Again, very cool sounding version of the song. Johnny Depp did a great job singing it, but I was really surprised by that because I thought they were trying to establish it more as an original thing.
They did release a couple original songs from this new record. There's 2 additional songs out now. One called The Boogeyman Surprise and another called Who's Laughing Now.
Well, I'm unaware of that, so maybe that's why they figured they should put out Heroes, because those didn't necessarily blow up when they put them out. Let's get a friggin' song everybody knows out here quick. I don't know. Is the record even out yet? I don't think the album's even come out yet.
It is not. Hang on.
That's what I mean with the music industry today, you guys. It's crazy. 3 songs in on a record. We don't even know if the record came out yet. Last night you got Jimmy Kimmel holding the album up, but it's not available yet. There's 3 songs. They're playing. It's nuts. The process of like what people are doing, how much the lead music, the lead time, how many singles. Like, well, you don't even. How do people, even if they do want to buy music, know what is and isn't out there?
I tell you what, Eddie, we'll find out more tomorrow because that's when the record is out.
All right. Well, there you go. I don't. I said it a million times. It's the Wild West. Everybody has a different way of doing things. Who knows what's right or what's wrong? But I'm a guy that I actually would play that record, and I have an outlet to play it, and a national outlet. I have no knowledge of it. So wherever it's being worked or whatever's going on with it, love to have any of the guys on. I'd love to physically have the record to play the songs. I have nothing. It's another thing that's wrong with the music industry. I mean, I have a national syndicated music show every week that plays 3 hours of music, new and classic. You know how much stuff does not get sent to me or flies under my radar because nobody ever properly sends it to me? It's incredible. And people wonder why these records die in a week or nobody knows they come out. It's just so many misfires. It's just such a mess. The way the business is set up, it's such a mess today. And it's maddening because there's a lot of good stuff out there. A guy in the business can't even keep up with it or doesn't know about it. How are the fans supposed to know? It's crazy.